to get straight down to business because we've got 15 minutes, so I want to get as many questions into the gentleman as possible. So Sean, I'd like to begin with you. How are geopolitical disruptions impacting the regulatory landscape in the next decade?
Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, you didn't expect to hear that quote at the beginning of this, made a rather remarkable observation in 1917. He said, there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. That's where we are. We're in a period of enormous disruption, arguably an historical inflection point, equivalent to anything that human history has yet experienced. The problem about that disruption is that it is interrupting the harmony and the prosperity that has characterized human experience since roughly 1991, 1992, at the end of the Cold War. The world has got much richer, extreme poverty has fallen, higher degrees of regulatory certainty emerged on a global stage over that period of 30 years because we broadly agreed with one another about the rules of the game. Now let's look very quickly at 5,000 years of history. The simple truth is that all periods of massive disruption enable a leap into the future, but they involve the destruction of the past. The original human civilizations, interestingly enough, come largely from this part of the world. The Mesopotamian civilization, the Egyptian civilization, the Indus Valley civilization, and the Chinese civilization, all Asian. And they were the civilizations that took humankind from hunter-gatherer status to settled agriculture and the birth of cities. That was extrapolated through the Greco-Roman period, and then quite extraordinarily, at the birth of Islam, an empire that began in Damascus, spread to Baghdad, and then spread across the entirety of the Mediterranean, extending all the way to Transoxania and Sind, on the borders of India and China, enabled the first knowledge society. The Dar al-Hikmah, the Bait al-Hikmah, the extraordinary surge forward in respect of astronomy and hence navigation, of mathematics across all fields, enabling huge surges in human creativity, were all born between the 9th and the 13th centuries in the space I've just described. That birthed the European Renaissance, the Age of Reason, the Enlightenment, and the First Industrial Revolution. And out of that came the modern. Why? Because there was a rule, because there was a lingua franca, because comparative scientific expectation and experimentation was possible across a large landscape. And the second great surge after that was due to the period of European stability after the Napoleonic Wars, when the Congress of Vienna once again created rules of the game, and we surged through what we now call the Second and Third Industrial Revolutions up to the Second World War. We are at such a moment today. Seen from the perspective of the United States, there are 4 gigantic crises right now: Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. If you have a look at the national security strategy of the United States, which is being followed by Japan, by the United Kingdom, and increasingly by Europe, you'll find that Russia and China are defined as the 2 dislocative elements. The problem about that is it is dislocating the rules-based international order. It is creating a level of uncertainty about the rules of the game. And as Antonio Guterres warned a few weeks ago at Davos, this tectonic split between potentially China and the United States risks giving us a period in which we will have no rules of the game for international trade, the disruption of global supply chains, a split into potentially two internets, and a circumstance in which the rules and the regulations that govern technological explosion, which we're going to spend the rest of this time talking about, will not occur within a single landscape. That's the challenge of this moment in this respect.
Thank you. Very succinct and brief travel through time there to bring us up to date. I mean, we heard some of the stats earlier. The rate of legislative changes has increased 500% in the past decade. New regulatory update is issued every 7 minutes. That's pretty impressive. But, for you, Joseph, what do you see are the global technology trends affecting the future of those laws and regulations?
Great question. First, thank you for having me. I really appreciate this. It's such an opportunity because there's so much going on right now. It's absolutely incredible. You all know this. You've seen the videos. You've heard about what was just discussed earlier. And Sean framed it up really, really well. One of the things that I've been focused on around technology, having been in blockchain since 2011, for better or worse, built cryptocurrencies in 2017, worked on NFTs in 2018, is that there are 3 or 4 things among dozens that I think are really important to stay focused in on. So first, it's the large language models, right? So the AI that we hear about, probably too much, but not really, because it really is that important. A component of this generative AI, not only is it generating text, imagery, it's combining the two such that deep fakes are something that we all need to be deeply concerned about. Probably 4 or 5 years ago, I was able to mimic my voice, but after 10 minutes of speaking it. And then all of a sudden, it was able to generate my voice from that. Now we can do it in 6 seconds. Same thing with video. At this point in time, you're able to take short clips of video and turn that into something that is unbelievably realistic. There's positives and negatives there. The positive is that artists, actors could actually leverage that, could license that. But on the negative side, you could have all sorts of political issues with that, where people are claiming to be something or saying something. Huge issue on that front. There's other areas that I focus in on are NFTs. We hear about that probably as much. Non-fungible tokens are so important because they are the basis for a lot of digital assets going forward. Think about the deed to your property, the deed to your car. All of those things are components to this. We have to understand how the regulatory body is going to be able to interpret that, as well as DAOs, so decentralized autonomous organizations. Very, very important as you start to think about the new businesses, the new models of people starting to work together. Because as you go out past 2 years, you're going to see organizations building almost new government entities around the world because they can rely on each other to work within this space. But what underlines all of this, what is important to think about in all of this, is the digital wallet. So there are numbers all over the place. The digital wallet is what holds all of these assets and can help out on the AI front as well. So that digital wallet, some say there's 80 million, some say there's 400 million. Among the 8 billion people that there are on the earth right now, that's roughly 1% if you're looking at the 80 million people around the world that have these. So if you think about that as the components that sits and controls everything that you have going forward the next several years, your NFTs, your digital assets, so cryptocurrency, your DAO tokens to help vote on things. Regulators are going to need to have to understand the technology first and then work with that. The innovation piece is huge, and we don't want to stymie that in the moment.
Joe, you mentioned there, some of the focuses that governments are going to have to shed light on and look at a bit more deeply, but where should they really, what's the priority? Where should governments focus to cater for the needs of the regulatory market?
Yeah, so there's a few ways of looking at this. I think if they're to understand the technology first and then start to work within, like, let's say just the digital wallet component, understand that, okay, people now have more access than they ever had before to control their own information.
Yeah.
What does that do to governments who typically sort of lead the way, as well as businesses leading the way? That's no longer the case. It's all being decentralized, and the power, the cat is out of the bag, so they say. I mean, all this technology is universal. Yep. It is easy to get to, so it's one of those things that people have to start thinking about, yes.
Thank you. Sean? Is there a demand and supply for new types of regulations in the global economy, and why?
The problem about the question, this is not a criticism, obviously, of the way you phrased it, but the problem about the question is we don't know.
Yeah.
The space within which technological development is taking place and the speed at which it is taking place are so extraordinary that it is inevitably impossible for the regulator to be ahead of the curve. Think a little bit back to 2007, 8, 9, 10, as we went through the first phases of the global financial crisis. The regulators were lagging way behind. Neither the SEC in the United States, nor the central banks of the world, nor the BIS in Switzerland had a clue what was happening in respect of that space. John Taine, who had created the NYSE, gave a remarkable speech in 2009 in Wharton. I happened to chair it. But he gave a remarkable speech where he said, I think it's fair to say that pretty much no one knew what was happening in the technological spaces. Not the quants who were writing the algorithms, not the managers who were implementing them, and certainly not the boards who were governing them. So how do you get there? How do you get to a situation where this phenomenal biodigital transformation that's taking place, it's much more than a fourth industrial revolution, by the way. It's the combination of everything that is happening in infotech, including generative AI and the whole blockchain phenomenon, with biotech, where CRISPR-Cas9 and everything that is changing what it means to be a seed, a plant, an animal, or a human is being transformed before our eyes. Nanotech, which is enabling interventions in both of those spaces in wholly remarkable ways, and neurotech, which is changing the way in which we think and can function. All of that is happening simultaneously. We have more postdocs today than we had persons with 12 years of schooling during the first industrial revolution. What is coming out of research laboratories in private and public spaces, in civilian and military spaces today, is orders of magnitude larger than anything that has happened in human history. So the fundamental challenge for regulation is to find ways, firstly, of understanding what is happening, then determining what you wish to incentivize and encourage to enable good without allowing the risk of too much harm, and then to try to ensure that you have a regulatory environment within your own jurisdiction, which is not fundamentally at odds with the regulatory environment in the world of which you're a part. It's a really, really big challenge.
Thank you. That brings me on, actually, Joe. I wanted to ask you, how much longer will law firms exist in the industry?
Goodness, it's a difficult question because there's so many people invested in this space, but law firms are at risk in many ways. A lot of the stuff that they're doing right now is kind of copy and paste. On the higher end, they're working with organizations, they're trying to solve the biggest and most complicated problems, but fundamentally, a lot of this stuff is going to be democratized in and of itself. If I can go to a chat where I'm discussing things, it's looking at previous cases, and it can produce that, then it helps everyone. People that have never had access to justice before will have that. So that's absolutely fantastic to have.
Thank you, gentlemen. I think we've left you with more questions than answers, but I think that was always going to be the outcome of this discussion. Thank you so much, Joseph Raczynski and Sean Cleary, for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency, thank you for letting us be a part of such a fantastic, thought-provoking discussion today. Thank you.